ILC Tamil in collaboration with ilakku.org news website, broadcasting from London, UK. Today, I'm joined by the members from National Council of Canadian Tamils, NCCT, Raksha Sivanandan, spokesperson, Subitha Dharma Kulasegaram, Vice Chair, Anishan Arul Sodhi, Board of Director. Thank you all for joining me today. It's great to meet you all, especially since you are attending the Geneva 55th session. I hope you had a productive session. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So let's dive right in. I would like to hear about key takeaways from 55th session.
As you mentioned, the 55th session is a session where I think from a global landscape, I think from a human rights perspective, there is a lot going on the global platform. There's many crises and many issues that the world is facing at this time. So when it comes to human rights, when it comes to accountability measures related to Sri Lanka, I think it is very essential that we as Tamil people, and specifically us as representatives of National Council of Canadian Tamils, really wanted to ensure that we have a voice at the table, that we are continuing our advocacy efforts. We as an organization, when we started in 2010, we started advocating politically, but also from a human rights perspective. So attending these UNHRC sessions in Geneva every year has been extremely integral and a learning opportunity in terms of where the world stands together in terms of human rights in Sri Lanka. And I think it's more than anything, this year is very crucial because as many of you may know, there was through the Office of the High Commissioner in Geneva, there was a resolution which had a mandate. So the resolution was passed by the core group in the UNHRC, and the core group, one of the countries, including Canada, along with US, UK, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Malawi, are the countries that comprise the core group. So they passed the resolution by the name of 51/1, which has a mandate to pursue evidence collection and analysis on the island of Sri Lanka with regards to various areas, including human rights and human right violations. So when it comes to this mandate, there was an oral update that was provided last year, and then there was a report that was released at the beginning of this council by the High Commissioner, and we are due to have a comprehensive report that is to be produced in September of 2024. And in that report, we know that there is a team that has been dedicated to do this evidence collection and analysis, known as the OSLAP team. So the SLAP stands for Sri Lanka Accountability Project. And these team members, including an investigator, senior legal advisor, and team leads, that comprises this team to do this evidence collection and analysis. And it's important to note here that we as Tamil people are working very closely with this team to see where are those gaps and where some of those recommendations lie in terms of accountability measures or prosecutorial mechanisms that might be considered in those recommendations, and that will then lead the UNHRC Council to make the appropriate decision when it comes to the next stage after this report is presented in September 2024. So it's important that we continue our advocacy as Tamil people in terms of meeting with the Office of the High Commissioner, meeting with member states, meeting with the SLAP team to continue to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're working towards the right path.
Subitha, can you share some insights you gained at the session?
Yes. So one of the things that that got mentioned often is that the genocide took place 15 years ago. So this May it will be 15 years that it took place. So over the years, the relevance or the importance is slowly starting to decrease because other nations are having their problem, or like right now the hot topic would be like on Gaza or like Ukraine. So one of the things that we always do is that we relate back to what's happening in the world to Ilam, and we say yes, even though we do not it's not as huge as it was in 2019, it's still ongoing. It's just they do it in a very small scale. They do it like individually. They do it like in different places. So it's scattered, but that doesn't mean the genocide ended. We're still targeted as a nation. We're as a community. We still targeted as an individual. The moment you're a Tamil living in Elam, you're not safe, right? That narrative has not been changed, and it will never change until there's some sort of accountability and there's some sort of a consequences for how they perpetrated the whole genocide in 2019. So that's the narrative that we keep using to make it to really push UN to still take a stand, because just because it happened years ago, the fact that we never got a solution, it should still stay relevant until we find a solution, or until we get some sort of justice for what has happened 15 years ago. And then if anything, I will bring it back the fact that, yes, it's been 15 years and nothing has been done. So what does that say about the UN? So we give it back to them on that sense, and they say, yeah, we're working on this, we're doing this. I'm like, well, until we don't find like a solution that we could concretely accept, like we cannot drop this, because it's by saying that it's been 15 years, because it's still going on. So that's an insight that I got. It's like over time they try to either minimize it, or it's been forever kind of narrative at times. So sometimes it's important to make them realize that, yes, even all these years, if anything, nothing has changed. We're still in the same boat. We're still getting discriminated. Violence has still been ongoing up north, and no justice has prevailed. So that was like pretty much the insight, just to always kind of push back on these nations and kind of urge the urgency to always keep us relevant and put us in priority and push for these investigations.
Thank you, Subita. Let me come to Anusha. I hear that you have been coming to Geneva for a number of years. What's your feelings around the accountability as far as Tamil's concerned? A lot more evidence, but what's your feeling around why there is a delay in any kind of justice for Tamils?
It's a good question, right? And, I think drawing back to the years prior, there certainly was a lot of advocacy that we've been doing at the UN, and certainly a lot more activism that we've been doing in front of the UN. And today's theme, and definitely what we're, as my learned colleagues kind of shared, the kind of relevance and resources is what we're battling, right? And over the years, it's the relevance has declined in terms of the member countries, as well as they all encounter their own regional conflicts, right? As we've mentioned. And then the resource aspect, right? So UN is undergoing a significant constraint on budget. We've witnessed a lot of sacrifices being made around the building as well. So these certainly delay the process. One thing that I think is really important for us to note is that there has been progress, right? And there has been a significant amount of achievement, especially in terms of the evidence gathering, and then the clarification of the narrative and understanding of the truth. And so that part, we're genuinely proud to say that a vast number of nations stand strongly with us in that they've identified these patterns of violence. They believe and clearly see that the Sri Lankan state is not committed at all to accountability, and has in fact taken steps further to extinguish others' attempts to mourn their dead, and even has gone as far as to try to commemorate war criminals on the island. And these facts are now receiving a strong nod from the member nations. And so kind of getting to your question of justice, we are now discovering that there are mechanisms for justice, and those mechanisms themselves are evolving over the years, right? There's international courts of justice, international criminal courts, and those also have varying levels of effectiveness. And so we're learning from our colleagues from our member countries as well, the approach that they've taken, what worked for them, and also encountering from them their frustrations with the Sri Lankan government's inactivity, lack of ability to execute the plans that they set forth, and overall lack of commitment to the process. In that transition also has become a very strong and acute interest in the voice of the Tamil diaspora, right? And that's what we're here to representing, and the member countries of the UN, including the core group to the Sri Lanka project. They are much more receptive of the information we've provided, and then we've been able to greatly influence the direction of their investigations through our own personal stories that we're able to share, connections to civil societies that we're able to share as well. So justice is moving, just not as swift as I think we would all want it to be, but certainly moving in a direction that's positive for the outcomes of the global community.
So do you feel that it's moving in the right direction?
So I think what's one thing that's really important is it's moving towards the culmination of the collective work being done on evidence gathering, which for us was one of the biggest challenges. As you know, the Sri Lankan state decided to expel NGOs on the last days of the genocide, and that caused a complete disconnect between what the world knew versus what happened. And of course, we know that one of the big differences between Gaza's conflict and the genocide of Tamil people is that there weren't iPhones back then. And then without the NGOs, now there's no visibility. So in terms of progress and in terms of how things are moving, there is now a pretty universal understanding of what happened in the nation. And rather today, the question is about how the mechanism of justice could work, and less so about the clarification of truth, which I think is a very important milestone for us. So there's a number of human rights violations, war crimes, and associated violations that are now documented and evidence gathered regarding them as well. So the dissemination of justice will now be easier for whether it be member nation states, whether it be civil societies and NGOs. The availability of that evidence is now a strong win for the Tamil community, where we previously only relied on anecdotal stories from many folks who've now encountered the conflict for over 30, 40 years in Sri Lanka, have been a targeted minority inside of Sri Lanka, and have now lost their voice, or their voice just been extinguished by not being heard. So I think in a way that today we're proud to say that evidence gathering process really sought to and has kind of immortalized the story of what happened to Tamil people in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Anshin. Raksha, let me come to you. The Tamils, they are disillusioned with UN, especially when you take Ukraine-Russia war and Israel-Gaza war, where they were able to table the motions and bring them pretty quickly. I mean, you guys just talked about the evidence out there for Tamils genocide that happened back in 2009. With all that, and we are here, 15 years on, I don't think we even moved an inch to be able to try and get some kind of justice. What's your feelings around that?
So that's a great question. I think, like you said, 15 years have passed since 2009, the Muliviko massacre, and there has been no justice, no accountability, like you mentioned, and rightfully so. To say that genocide happened on the island of Sri Lanka just 15 years ago, I would say would be inaccurate, because since Sri Lanka received British independence from the British in 1948, there have been various acts of genocide, various massacres that have happened on the island of Sri Lanka over time by successive Sri Lankan governments. So I think as Tamil people, it's understandable. So in terms of some people, I think it's natural for them to lose their patience in this accountability process, or in a entity like the UN. And I think we have to understand that there's also other challenges in the sense of resources that the UN needs, along with strong advocacy. So the landscape in 2009, I think, looked very different, especially during the massacre. And I think 2009 is what triggered a lot for us as a community, but also at the international landscape. Because after 2009, I think advocacy looked very different. Even though there was emotional outbursts during the time, people dying, friends, family, people that we all knew dying around us. But I think the advocacy that happened then versus what happened the years after looked very different. So I think we owe it to ourselves as a community to say we've come a long way in terms of our advocacy efforts. And I still strongly believe there's definitely probably things that we can be doing better or more proactively as Tamil people in terms of delivering consistent messaging, working more.
What do you mean by proactive?
So being proactive in the sense of, in advance of UNHRC sessions, for example, or in advance of, something for, like, if we know there is unrest on the island of Sri Lanka, or if we know that, there are challenges or issues already brewing, rather than being reactive, taking more of a proactive approach in terms of sitting down with whether it's elected officials. So when we do political advocacy, we leverage, election times. We leverage the politicians that we work with, and we have these, straightforward conversations. When there is a time that we need your support, we expect you to be there. So I think that proactive approach in terms of doing that engagement much in advance. And same with the UNHRC, right? Like being proactive at this stage, because in September, we don't know what direction the resolution or, next steps will look like in terms of how the report is going to be, is there a need for strengthening? So, for example, even when we were meeting with ambassadors today, they themselves mentioned, there are things that we would like to do versus what we can do. So it's important for us as Tamil people, Tamil organizations, to continue that advocacy and continue to, like Subhita mentioned, we need to continue to stay relevant, because the Sri Lankan government keeps coming at the UN and saying, this is done. This is a conflict. There was a civil war. Their narrative is that the civil war ended 15 years ago, and there's no need to revisit this topic, which for us, does not obviously make any sense. But there has, if we want justice and accountability to be achieved, we need to do, sometimes the long route is what it is. So we still have to take the appropriate steps. And unfortunately, the UN may not be able to move as fast as we want it to. And that's the hard truth that we all have to accept.
Thank you. Subhita, coming to Geneva, how much confidence do you have that Tamils will have some kind of justice and accountability for what has gone on back in 2009? What's your takeaway coming into Geneva and feel that you're moving in the right direction?
Right. So, whatever work you do, you have to believe in it. If you don't believe in it, then you will not do the work in it. So if I come into Geneva not confidently believing that we will one day take this to ICJ or ICC and we will get some sort of solution, and people back home will have their justice, none of us will be doing this work, right? So in that sense, we gotta really deeply believe that to every problem there's a solution, and there's only one problem and many solutions. So there's different routes to get to where we want to go to, but it doesn't mean that we won't get there. So
what is stopping us from taking Sri Lanka to ICJ? So
yeah, even that, right? Honestly, that's where we're headed. It should be, if I want to be blunt with you, so we're, UN is finally doing the investigation. They're really working on it. So when they're going to release those information, when they're going to release those findings, it's for a country to ask the UN to submit those findings and then take it to the ICJ, right? And at that point persecute it and then take these people to court and really do a whole trial. And from there, it's to push towards, it's to really acknowledge that there is no other solution but for a referendum in the end, right? We tried everything, and every time we always got backfired or betrayed or pushed back. So at this point, if they haven't done anything to make the situation livable for the people back home, what makes us say that they ever will?
While you were there, have you had any chance to speak to the High Commissioners?
Yes. So we spoke with some of their officers, and they're it's like they know what's going on. They know that Tamil people have been suffering in the hands of the Sinhala military, and the government is really enforcing that military by spending that much on military, and so they're pretty much aware of what's going on. But it's also like the word sovereignty, right? That's really where it.
Have they kind of revealed anything? I mean, you said obviously they know what's going on, but surely nobody's taking any kind of an action. But have they kind of give you any kind of indication as to why that is?
So see, that's where I come from. That's where the word sovereignty comes. Like, so every nation has its sovereign. It's a sovereign state, and that's that's what's kind of blocking them, and that's the longest road. It's like all these countries to kind of tell them like, hey, like, I see that this is happening. This is the suggestion we're giving you. Maybe, you should look into that, right? And then Sri Lanka always comes back saying like, yes, we're going to look into that. We just need more time. We need to readjust to this. We're very we see your concerns and so forth. And then they call up an election. There's economical crisis. There's always something happening for them to say, oh, we can't focus on this right now. We have other things to focus. So that's how they always been, disguising behind it, or trying to push it out and not doing much about it. Like IMF was a good route way when they were in the economical crisis. Honestly, that was a good way to approach and really make the government implement certain laws or certain things that could have give the Tamil people more of a rights, right? But then obviously China is involved. So it's like all these major players are involved in such a small country, that which makes it very hard for us to push some of these agendas, and even for the UN to push on some of these their findings and their agenda. So that's where we kind of get stuck. And
yeah, thank you, Anishan. Do you think that Sri Lanka is playing a kind of delaying tactics to try and get away from getting punished? Is this something that they're playing? And the other countries, do they actually know what these guys are doing?
So that's exactly it, right? I think that's where we are today, is that the other countries are aware. Just like a kid who steals cookies too many times and then finally gets caught with their hands in a cookie jar, Sri Lanka has been caught with their hands in a cookie jar by every country now. That's I guess what we're articulating here, the wealth of the work the UN has been working on and what's expected to be delivered here in September is a really glaring report on continued human rights violations with the evidences behind them that enable a country to take members or take action or take them to the ICJ. That was absent before, right? The actual evidence, the type of evidence that's necessary for legal proceedings, right? So those were really important components. Is Sri Lanka hiding? Absolutely. They've in fact sought to dissolve their government, it seems, in order to raise their hands and say, hey, not right now, please don't come at us now. This year is going to be very difficult. In fact, the economic crisis has been their excuse for the last couple of years. But at the same time, military spending hasn't decreased. There's economic suffrage across the population, while there's economic investment into militarization continues to increase in the north and east. The parties involved here are all very privy to it. I think really, what was missing in the 2000s, right, leading up right as the peace negotiations fell apart through the influence of Western powers. Today there are more eyes and there is more understanding of this hide and dodge kind of game that the Sri Lankan government has played for many years with the Tamil people. And today the counterparties are much larger, the US, the UK, and others. And so there's a strong realization from their side that Sri Lanka is not a strong accountability partner. There's ongoing internal culture of putting out propaganda about reconciliation without taking even a step towards truth and acceptance. And in fact, further trying to dissolve any sense of history that we have. So is Sri Lanka backing out? Are they trying to leverage their sovereignty, their economic crisis, and any other excuse that they can find to delay justice? Absolutely. Are the other countries aware of this and growing weary because of their lack of true participation in this process? Absolutely. And I think now more so than ever, is so important for civil societies within Sri Lanka to come forward, voice their opinion, and really enforce and strengthen the declining favoritism or popularism that we have about Sri Lanka and the leadership within the state. So I do believe that this year we will see Sri Lanka in some way bring forth some method to delay justice, as you said. But the UN themselves are also aware of that mechanism that they use, and have addressed with us a few different ways to approach that. And in fact, happy to share a little bit here as well with the ILC community. We came to learn that, and we learned this last year, and we came to get an update actually, that there have been a number of specific areas of sort of human rights violations, right? So there's what we in Canada have been fixated on, which is the genocide itself. Then there's more to do with, whether it's enforced disappearances or violence against women and children. These have been more concrete. The evidence has been more concrete there. And two, these are much more concern-worthy than some of the other, culmination of violations by Sri Lanka. So the UN has taken the approach to sharpen their daggers, so to speak, right? That these allegations cannot be so sporadic and diverse, but rather fixated on things that need immediate reform today. And for us as a global Tamil community, these were at the top of the list of reasons why the Sri Lankan state never was a home for Tamil people. And those are being addressed. And in fact, in a report that is expected to come within the coming months, and that's all we can really share, I think, at this point, there is going to be quite a significant, I think, compelling reason for anyone who has doubted the advocacy of the Tamil community to really change their mind, because of the severity and the gravity of the findings within that report, and the associated comprehensive report expected in September. And so I do believe that this year is going to be one where it will be very difficult to get any movement or justice from Sri Lanka.
It's fascinating listening to all three of you. Honestly, I really enjoyed that. Just final word from you. I'd love to hear from your final comment. Raksha, to start with, what's your feeling? Obviously, the session's coming to an end, going back to Canada. What's your feelings around what has gone on?
I think the strong feeling that I take away from this session in particular is the need to continue to stay engaged, the need to stay connected with member states, not just Western countries, but Latin American countries, African countries, Asian countries. It's very, very essential that we expand and make sure it's a broad network of countries, because they all influence each other, right? Obviously, there's the bigger political landscape, but they all influence each other. And then with regards to the Office of the High Commissioner, the work that they're carrying out, whether it's around, SLAP and their evidence collection analysis, or whether it's, looking at economic crisis and how it impacts human rights, all this work is very essential and very crucial. So we have the ability to advocate and influence at this time, because after September comes, we may or may not be able to have that influence in the same way, because that there will be a report, and there will be certain angles or strategies that are taken by the core group. So it's very important to plant that seed in advance into the core group, those countries that are leading some of this work in terms of the resolution, and to gather that support and work together as a community. So it's important to stay connected with the UNHRC process, but also as Tamil people, as communities. So not just working within Canada, but working with Tamil diaspora organizations in the UK, in the US, European Union. Like, I think it's essential that we expand our networks and ensure that we're all delivering some consistent messaging, because all of us wanting different things is also going to create a lot of confusion and challenges in this whole process at the UN. So I think I take my key takeaway is to continue to stay engaged and connected and ensure that we're all on the same page on what we are looking for as people.
So my approach would be like a bit different. Like obviously Ruksha has a very good point. So for me, I always like, it has to come from internal to external. So I believe like it has to come from you to the outside world. So you have to work with the politicians in your state or country that you're in. So really get engaged in politics, right? Like Canada, that's one thing NCCT we've been doing for a very long time is political advocacy. Like we have been very keen on that. We work closely with politicians. We inform them what's going on. We push them to take a stance, especially during election time. We go and we ask them, these are our demands as a community. This is what we want. What will you do for us? And then first they'll say, oh, we'll look into it. And then you kind of create that competition between these parties, right? Like you need to be like, okay, whoever is going to support our cause and understand our pain is the party that the community is going to support. So that creates like relevance, that because politicians, what they mostly want is to be elected. So, and then that's the one time as a community, we have our voice to be heard, right? So that's where I think it's important that the younger generation really steps in. Like why is it that we're such a huge diaspora? Why isn't that like in every country? Why don't we have one or two of us in politics? Like for example, Vijay Thanigasalam, like MPP for Scarborough Rouge Park, he passed Bill 104 concerning the Tamil Genocide Education Week, which is huge because now we're getting educated on the Tamil genocide, which is even more than just recognizing it, right? Like it's to have an education because knowledge is power. So why couldn't we do the same in other countries? Because clearly he has a protocol, he did it, so it's doable. So it's to just take that and like apply it elsewhere in the world and really push it through. And our generation is really, we're professionals where we work in with these systems. So it's really for us to step forward and engage with politicians, engage in politics, and really make the change with our home country, so that when we come to the international platform, as you can see, Canada plays a key role when it comes to Tamil genocide because they get pressure, they get pushed from like politicians back home, right? But Melanie Joly, she sanctioned two of the prominent perpetrators. So this is what we need. Like we need people to just get engaged on domestically, so that it will influence the platform on an international level.
Thank you.
No, it's great. You can tell my colleagues and I are very aligned because I have very little to add and probably just reinforce what they've already shared here, right? Is that the community is in a very different place than we were decades ago. In fact, the economic might of the global Tamil community usurps the Sri Lankan government's GDP by a large margin, especially with Sri Lankan inflation today. We are a larger economic power than them, and the only thing missing is we're not a collective economic power. And so really implore everyone here, I think, to, one, come out and support your Tamil activist organizations, your local organizations through to the ones doing international advocacy, and work with each other, right? There are differences that have always divided Tamil people, whether it's between the North and the East, whether it's between the domicile of your village or your academic background, or of course caste, which was also a rampant issue in many communities. We need to overcome all of those because the pivotal moment, I think, is right around the corner for our community. And the only thing that can stand in our way now, truthfully, is fracturing within ourselves. And so we need to work to build connections between groups, between international groups like ours, become more aligned, share dialogue, and be very careful before we approach the organizations that could support us here. Being aligned on the request is more important than being the first one to get the door and ask, right? And that's what we've learned. There's a lot of eagerness within our community, certainly a lot of folks who want to do good and receive associated recognition. Today we have to be a bit more collective. And I really do implore you to also, for the listeners, look at Canada, right? Look at the activism and what we've accomplished there. Look at sort of the framework that we've brought forward to the point that we're at today. And really implore your elected officials as well to recognize the voting power of the Tamil community and our steadfast commitment to finding justice for our Ulam Tamils that were on the island of Sri Lanka. So really hope that the coming years are going to see a growth in the next generation of activism, and we are starting to see it already, and it's incredibly empowering.
Thoroughly enjoyed these discussions that I had with you. Every time we talk about the next generation and the struggle baton passed on to next generation, and people come on the radio and talk about, we don't see a lot. But I'll tell you today, I'm really inspired by what I heard from you guys. And I've really, and also the Canadian Tamils have done a fabulous job over the years. And I think you guys played a key part in this. We're glad to see our younger generations taking that baton and then leading from the front. Honestly, this is exactly what people were looking to see. When will I see our younger generation, leading from the front? And I think I can see the green shoots, and I really appreciate your time that you spend, and well done. And please keep up the good work. And I think we all have to come together to achieve that goal, the one final goal. Whatever the differences we have, we need to be mature enough to listen to the argument and agree to disagree. This kind of attitude is very important. But I honestly, I really enjoyed the discussion here. So keep up the good work, and hope to catch up. See you next time.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the kind words.